FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and today is February 14th, 2017, Valentine's Day. Hey, somebody you love, buy him a gun. And with us is John R. Lott. You know him well, seminal research, More Guns, Less Crime, latest book, The War on Guns. You find him at crimeresearch.org. His organization is Crime Prevention Research Center. John, welcome back to the show.
Oh, it's great to talk to you again, as always.
Hey, you too. And we've got good news for, hopefully, for veterans, but definitely for Social Security recipients who've been wrongly deprived of their rights to defend themselves, their Second Amendment rights. Things are looking up for them, aren't they?
Right. Well, one of the regulations that Obama pushed through right before he left Washington was a rule that said that people who required or had help on their finances would be defined as mentally disabled and therefore not be legally able to go and buy guns. You know, it's a real overstep just to go and say that anybody who has help with their finances is somehow not capable of making decisions on whether they need to be protected or not. You know, my mom, for example, is in her 80s. She hates using computers. She's given my sister, who lives near her, power of attorney to go and handle paying her bills and what have you. But that doesn't mean that my mom, just because she hates using computers, isn't able to go and defend herself. And the thing is, you know, it's basically women and the elderly who benefit the most from having guns because they're relatively weaker physically. It's much more difficult for them to go and put up resistance against a male attacker than it would be for you or I to go and do that. And so, you know, this kind of blanket rule that anybody who falls into this category is deemed mentally incompetent, you know, it's just really broad. A couple weeks ago, the House voted to overturn this regulation, and the Senate was supposed to do it this last week. They just need a simple majority vote, but with the Democrats taking 30 hours each for each of the cabinet nominees to be confirmed, the Senate hasn't been able to do anything else other than slowly confirm these cabinet nominations. But hopefully this week they'll be able to get to it and vote on it. And the same thing has happened to veterans. You have like 600,000 veterans. I should say this rule for Social Security apparently would apply to about 4.2 million people. So this is not a trivial thing there. And there are about 600,000 veterans from an earlier rule put out by the Obama administration, which if they've gotten help with their finances, for years now, the Obama administration has been defining them as mentally incompetent.
Yeah, and look, if not being able to handle your finances was the benchmark of mental competence, I think we'd have probably tens of millions of mentally incompetent, scare quotes, citizens, not just a few million elderly and a few million veterans, right? I mean, we've got a lot of people who can't handle their finances who probably should be put under court supervision, right?
Well, the scary thing is having the government determine who's competent to handle their finances or not. I mean, it's not like I view most of these politicians as being competent to handle the nation's finances. I'm not sure I want them judging whether other people are competent or not.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, right. The U.S. certainly Congress should be adjudicated non-compos mentis under that standard, because look what they've done to us. $20 trillion. And the last 6 or 7 presidents have been enablers or aiders and abettors in the process as well. So if we start using finances, ability to handle and manage finances as a standard of disability and right to defend yourself, they've got a lot of company, these seniors, don't they?
Right.
So this clearly is some artificial standard which shows the former administration's antipathy towards the Second Amendment. Thank goodness Trump got in, because Hillary would have just used it as a springboard for yet more hostility and more absurd controls on the Second Amendment and the right to defend yourself.
Well, she surely posed a lot of risks herself. She would have kept these types of regulations in place, but the biggest risk that was faced was who she was going to be appointing to the Supreme Court. She had said multiple times that she wanted to overturn the Heller and McDonald decisions, the ones that struck down gun bans in Washington, D.C. and Chicago. And striking those down would have, again, made it possible for governments to completely ban guns. And that would have had far-reaching impacts. I mean, it's not just places like Washington, D.C., which would probably quickly pass a gun ban again, but you have California, for example. Since 2001, they have so-called safety and other regulations on handguns, which have made it so that about over 1,200 models of handguns are now prohibited from being sold in California. There's literally only a dozen, at least as of 6 months ago, a dozen models of handguns that could still be sold in the state. And, in a couple of years, you'd be likely down to no handguns could be legally sold in California. And if Clinton had been able to get her way with regard to the Supreme Court, that type of complete ban on handguns would likely be upheld. These decisions before saying the government could not completely ban all guns or an entire category of guns, like all handguns, it's likely then that California wouldn't be allowed to go and use these so-called safety regulations. Some of them are things like, can you drop a gun from the top of a tall building onto cement and have it, still perfectly function? It's not like most people go and do something like that, or if they did, would expect no harm to come to their gun. But the regulations weren't really there for safety. The regulations were there just to try to ban guns, make it so that guns couldn't get approved for sale in the state.
Yeah, well, look, and most police around the country carry a Glock, a handgun made in Austria, no external safety. Clearly, that is a gun that will never pass any of these tests, yet it's good enough for law enforcement, but it's not good enough for the individual citizen to arm him or herself with. So what are they telling us here? So that's sacrifice your right to defend yourself, disarm yourself because the state is going to take care of you. There's something wrong with this reasoning, especially because and I know you track this stuff. Every day there are multiple incidences where armed citizens are able to protect themselves, yourself, others, by carrying concealed and unconcealed handguns. It happens multiple times every day. The legacy media does their best to cover it up and to marginalize it and minimize it. But multiple times, John, every single day this happens. And yet we're supposed to surrender all of our rights to self-defense, fundamental human right, and hope that the police will be on the scene if and when the need should arise. There's something wrong with this reasoning. Right.
Well, one of the things I do in the war on guns is just to point out recent examples, a dozen examples or so over just the last few years of mass public shootings that have been stopped around the country by citizens with permanent concealed handguns, cases where the police or prosecutors themselves have said that many lives were saved. And yet none of those stories got any type of national news coverage. They'd get a couple or a few local news stories. You'd have something like just last year, you had a case in South Carolina at a nightclub, literally just 10 days after the nightclub attack in Orlando, where a man pulled out a gun, started firing, shot 3 people. He had shot at a 4th, missing. But a person there with a permanent concealed handgun was able to stop the attack there. One can only imagine, given how sensitive everybody was about nightclub shootings, that you would imagine would have gotten a lot of attention, but it got no national coverage. The big difference between Orlando and this case in South Carolina was that Florida bans people from having permanent concealed handguns in nightclubs. Florida is only one of 10 states that have that type of restriction. South Carolina, that allows it, this person was stopped before he was able to go and rack up the large body count that you had in Orlando. Yeah. But, you have other cases, recent case in Conyers, Georgia, where a permit holder returned fire after a shooter killed 2 people in a convenience store. The sheriff there, a guy named Eric Levitt, said that in his opinion, lives were saved in that store because of that. You had a case 2 years ago in South Carolina where at a volunteer fire department, it was Children's Day. Kids were getting rides on fire trucks, getting ice cream, playing games, and someone came up firing their gun. Fortunately, 2 of the volunteer fire department members there were permit holders, and they were able to stop him. The headline in a local TV news report said, concealed carry holders likely stop deaths of children and firefighters. I could go on.
I thought, I know.
Lots of cases, but those dramatic cases don't get any type of national news coverage. And my guess is the entire debate that we have right now on guns would be dramatically different if 2 types of points got covered. One, those types of stories where heroes saved multiple lives. And the other one is when we do have mass public shootings, one thing that's virtually never mentioned in the news is that these attacks keep on occurring time after time in places where general citizens were banned from having guns. Yeah. And since 1950, more than 98% of the mass public shootings have occurred in places where general citizens aren't allowed to go and defend themselves. All the attacks in Canada, all the mass public shootings in Europe have taken place in these so-called gun-free zones. And one of the things I go through in the war on guns is just to point out how explicitly so many of these killers have explained why they picked the targets that they did, and they do so because they want to go after places where victims can't defend themselves. There was a case last year in Detroit where a father was concerned about his son's involvement with ISIS, had told the FBI. The FBI put a wiretap on his phone, and they recorded a very chilling conversation where this man explained to someone why he was picking one of the largest churches in the Detroit area to attack. It was because people at that church were not allowed to carry guns on church property. And and he explained in chilling detail how that made it easier for him to kill people because he didn't have to worry about someone defending himself. But, it's whether you're talking about the Charleston church shooting, the Aurora, Colorado attack, San Bernardino, case after case where these killers have left statements indicating that they cared about trying to go after some place where they knew victims couldn't defend themselves. There's a reason why people don't put signs on the front of their house that say this home is a gun-free zone.
Yeah, quite the contrary. Well, my favorite recent story of Second Amendment reaping dividends was that sheriff's deputy that was under attack in Arizona. And guy goes by and says, "Do you need help?" And he says, "Yeah, I need help." And this guy goes to his car, gets the gun, kills the guy who's attacking the deputy. It turns out that the guy who came to the rescue, the cop, had been a felon, gotten his rights restored. As a result, had his gun, saved that guy's life. The sheriff said that he saved his life. And, this is a perfect example where the armed citizen coming to the aid of the police and saving a life. And there, the media couldn't ignore it. And it was all over the place. And, chalk up one for the good guys here. They couldn't avoid the story.
You may not know this, but over the last year, there have been 4 cases around the country where the police officers had similar types of stories, where the police officers themselves have said they would be dead if it wasn't for a permit holder who happened to be by there and was able to protect them.
Yeah. So, John, you've been doing this research now for a couple of decades. right? What's the best part of your mission here? What you've been doing, what you've accomplished during your time of work here?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I kind of got stuck into this. I mean, I'm an economist. I've done a lot of work in a lot of different areas. I was chief economist at the U.S. Sentencing Commission, but I'd never really been very interested in guns. And I just kind of stumbled into the area because I was teaching at Wharton at the time, and some students, I'd made the mistake of telling some students that we were ahead in the syllabus, and they asked me if I could go and give a short lecture on gun control, and I said sure, and it forced me to kind of read through the literature, academic literature on that area, and I was pretty shocked by how poorly done the existing research was. And when you're an academic, you do research either because you have a new idea or because you think you can do a better job. I almost always have done work because I have a new idea, but once I got into this, I was just kind of amazed the amount of false information that's just continually put out. And now you have people like Bloomberg it's not just the $50 million a year that he spends on his Everytown organization. This last year, he spent $20 million just on two initiatives, which he ended up effectively losing in both Nevada and Maine. In Nevada, he spent like $35 per vote. But he spent hundreds of millions of dollars on research. I go through a number of things that he's put out in my book, The War on Guns. But, I don't believe that there would really be much of a gun control push right now or movement if it wasn't for the huge amount of money that Bloomberg spends. I'll just give you one comparison. Between 2013 and 2016, Bloomberg spent over $48 million on donations to federal candidates running for office. During that same 4-year period of time, the NRA spent about $2.3 million. So, and I think the ratio is even more lopsided when you get to state legislative races. You'll find a number of races around the country for state legislative races where Bloomberg will put $1 million or $2 million into the race. I mean, these are just phenomenal amounts of money for state legislative races. The amount that he donates exceeds, in some cases, the amount that both the two candidates would have been spending on their own in the race.
That's remarkable. So you've really upped the intellectual level of the debate then, if I could paraphrase you, and really brought some sound, logical arguments to a debate that totally lacked them before you entered the arena of ideas here on gun control. Because it was kind of, I remember before your study, it was kind of just presumed that the more guns we had on, in the marketplace, the more violence there was going to be. And then when you came out with your study, it was like, wait a second, that's not necessarily true. And all of a sudden, you really had the left completely on the defensive here. They didn't know what hit them. It was remarkable.
Hopefully it's had some benefit. Yeah. I mean, we want to save lives, and if we're going to save lives, we have to make sure that, we do accurate studies on these things. And, it's also the reason why I've set up the Crime Prevention Research Center.
Yeah, which is a great thing. So we find the Crime Prevention Research Center at crimeresearch.org. The War on Guns, your latest book, obviously Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold. And we're going to have a link in the show notes to this interview on financialsurvivalnetwork.com so people can get over to your website. And any questions, comments on this interview or others we've had, simply send an email, kl@kerrylutz.com, kl@kerrylutz.com. Hey, John, always a pleasure speaking with you. Keep up the great work. We'll talk to you again soon.
It's great talking to Kerry. Thanks very much.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next. FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and today is February 14th, 2017, Valentine's Day. Hey, somebody you love, buy him a gun. And with us is John R. Lott. You know him well, seminal research, More Guns, Less Crime, latest book, The War on Guns. You find him at crimeresearch.org. His organization is Crime Prevention Research.
Obama pushed through right before he left Washington was a rule that said that people who required or had help on their finances would be defined as mentally disabled and therefore not be legally able to go and buy guns. You know, it's a real overstep just to go and say that anybody who has help with their finances is somehow not capable.
Senator John, welcome back to the show.
Oh, it's great to talk to you again, as always.
Hey, you too. And we've got good news for, hopefully, for veterans, but definitely for Social Security recipients who've been wrongly deprived of their rights to defend themselves, their Second Amendment rights. Things are looking up for them, aren't they?
Right. Well, one of the regulations that of making decisions on whether they need to be protected or not. You know, my mom, for example, is in her 80s. She hates using computers. She's given my sister, who lives near her, power of attorney to go and handle paying her bills and what have you. But that doesn't mean that my mom, just because she hates using computers,